what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, June 1st, 2021. June is busting out all over, and I'd warned June about wearing those tight sweaters, but she didn't listen to me on that one. Anyway, we have got a lot of stuff to talk about, start of a brand new month here, and as usual, we're going to do news until we run out of news. Then we're going to open up the phone lines for your comments, questions, observations, and opinions. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, so let's get right on into it. Now, I did mention this story briefly yesterday, but I think it deserves another look, and it has to do with the audit down in Fulton County, Georgia. And there is this supposedly secure building where they are keeping all the ballots, and a security alarm went off in the middle of the night. And when they went to check it out, they found the building was wide open and unattended. And this, to me, first of all, the auditors, the people in charge of the recount, somebody dropped the ball on security. This may be as simple as compromising the security of the building so that when Fulton County says the ballots don't match the machines, the Democrats can say, well, you know, the building was broken into, and somebody was changing the ballots to try and steal the election back for Donald Trump. But again, this is one of the dirtiest elections, most crooked elections we have ever seen. Over in Arizona, Senator Wendy Rogers is saying we need to look at what's going on from the Arizona audit, and primarily says the media, the corporate media, have served to fragment and erode our confidence. Well, I don't think so. The media have been in absolute goose step trying to reassure Americans our elections are honest and fair and transparent when the actual evidence that is surfacing shows quite the contrary. And they're not going to regain the trust of the American people by simply having corporate media scream at us 24 hours a day, the elections are fair, the elections are fair, the elections are fair, the elections are fair, because after all, this is the same corporate media that assured us all that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, etc., ad infinitum, ad nauseum. Again, the Democrats are clearly desperate. You can smell the fear in the air. And there is absolutely nothing they will not do to prevent any of these audits going forward, or to try and discredit them or dismiss them or ridicule them, marginalize them any way they can. This is a full court press in terms of propaganda and fraud on top of fraud on top of the fraud on top of the fraud. Over in Texas, there was a little bit of a stink over the weekend where Texas, the Senate, overwhelmingly passed this new voter security bill. They're calling it a voting rights bill, and it calls for things like mandatory voter ID, restrictions on absentee and mail-in ballots, and just all kinds of common sense things to try and secure the election. The Democrats are out there screaming, it's voter suppression, it's voter suppression, it's voter suppression. And as a last desperate act, the Democrats literally walked out of the House of Representatives to prevent there being a quorum and a vote on the House version of the bill, which probably would have passed by a wide margin. So now Texas Governor Abbott is saying he is going to strip these Democratic state lawmakers of their pay and block all their budget requests, because the Democrats abandoned their duties and their obligation to the voters by walking out on the voting rights bill. And again, these kind of childish tactics betray just how desperate the Democrats are to keep the fraud in place, to make it part of the voting system from now on, so that we become a one-party nation like the former Soviet Union. Michael Flynn has backtracked on comments he made at a QAnon conference over the weekend where he suggested a military coup similar to the one that occurred in Myanmar should happen in the United States. He's now denying that he said that, but there is video footage from the event in which he makes that statement. And I can understand where he's coming from, because the coup in Myanmar, the military coup in Myanmar, was in response to evidence of massive election fraud in the Myanmar elections. And somebody's got to do something about all this vote fraud going on. I certainly don't intend to accept the results of last November. Pretty much nobody around here accepts those results. Even Democrats I've talked to are acknowledging, yeah, there was something kind of hanky about that whole November election. All right, down in Miami, there was a mass shooting over the weekend. And what's really interesting is the police were busting this guy based on evidence from an FBI informant that this guy was a white supremacist and he was going to shoot up a Walmart. It turned out to be another fairy tale fantasy to demonize white supremacists. Meanwhile, completely undetected and unstopped by the police, these three individuals drove up to a party for a local rapper and opened fire, killing 2 and wounding 21. It probably would have been a lot worse, but there were attendees at this party who returned fire on the gunman. Now, they were caught on a security camera driving up in this white van with the assault rifles, and that van, the license plate was clearly readable, but as it turns out, the van was stolen and was abandoned in a canal. Now, the shooters were wearing hoods, but frankly, if you look at their body language, I think it's going to tell you just who was behind this shooting, and maybe it was a rival gang. There's a lot of gang crime going on down in Miami. Over in Tulsa, there were activists from the new Black Panther Party that basically came on out for this armed march in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was supposed to be a peaceful commemoration of a very unfortunate incident that happened there about 100 years ago. And one of the armed black supremacists was out there shouting, "There will come a time when we will kill everything white in sight." So if you are a cloud or a snowbank, you may be in trouble on all of that. Okay. Over in North Carolina, their Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, has come down hard opposing critical race theory, saying that it is actually a mirror of the teachings of the Ku Klux Klan. And the reason he said that is because critical race theory teaches that a person's skin color is the most important thing about them, and that was something that the KKK was also teaching. And it's very frustrating for Martin Luther King to have fought so hard for, you know, his I Have a Dream speech, that we're going to judge each other by the content of our character and not by the color of our skin. And you have all these black activists out there saying, yes, let's judge by the color of the skin. Okay. There was, over in central Connecticut at State University, there was another report of a noose hanging out there. Oh, horror of hearts, the KKK. It turned out actually to be a U.S. flag on a construction crane. And, you know, the reality is that, you know, yes, nooses can be used for bad things, but tying a loop in a rope is necessary for all kinds of things, like mooring a boat or hoisting a flag. And, you know, even tying your shoes on if you're still using laces on there. And it reminds me of the people who were paid so much money in the Middle Ages to be witch hunters, and they saw witches everywhere. And now we have all these Black Lives Matter people who are trying to see racism everywhere, even when it doesn't exist. And that's exactly what's happening. Getting on back to what happened in the Capitol in January 6th, story coming out of Station Gossip, there is new evidence that has surfaced showing it was the Capitol Police inciting violence, and they fired exploding flash grenades into the crowd. And the exploding grenade was fired into a crowd of men, women, and children. So the Capitol Police started the violence. They continued with Ashley Babbitt. And the media is still out there trying to convince you that it was the Trump supporters who were the villains in all of this. But then, heck, it's not like any of us listen to the corporate media anymore. I mean, they've really rendered themselves irrelevant. And it's not surprising CNN has lost 70% of their viewership. And you kind of have to wonder what kind of brain-dead morons comprise that remaining 30% of their audience. Because maybe they just want to be lied to. Maybe they just want to stay in their homes and be reassured that everything is just fine and there's no reason to worry about what may be happening following that vaccination. Jeffrey Epstein is in the news again, and it has now come on out that the prison records covering the time that he died had been falsified. Now, there are prison guards out there claiming that they were just taking a nap and that Epstein did, in fact, hang himself. And they've had a plea agreement, a plea deal. So they're not really going to face much trouble. But it does confirm the fact that the records were altered, and that means all kinds of things could have happened. And Epstein, for all we know, is down in the Caymans, playing canasta with who knows what all else criminal has faked their own death. Getting on to COVID-19, yes, it's still out there and it's still a problem. Boris Johnson is out there on the warpath, if you will, or the needle path, saying that we need to vaccinate the world by 2022. And I don't think so. It's all about the money. And over in the Straits Times, they have an article saying that, yes, the COVID-19 vaccine shot will become a yearly shot like the flu shot. And over at Big Pharma, they're saying money, 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 because that's what it's really all about, is maximizing the profit from sick and suffering individuals. It's all about the Benjamins. Meanwhile, some other news is coming on out showing that vaccines, we've already seen the evidence, they're harmful. They may not even be necessary. Story out of Domagood is saying that an antibody that develops naturally in your body following the common cold will neutralize the COVID-19 virus. So if you've had the common cold, you are immune to COVID-19. You don't need a vaccine. Now, the study is out there saying that natural immunity is actually more effective against COVID-19 than whatever it is those vaccines are doing. Over in China, they had been relaxing their lockdowns and distancing procedures because the regular COVID-19 had been in decline. But now the so-called Indian variant has crossed the border, and it is surging through the population. So there's that one. Yesterday, we were reporting on scientists who said there is no natural predecessor to the COVID-19 virus. It had to be man-made, and now there's another study, a 22-page paper, quoting British professor Angus Dalgleish. He was famous for creating the world's first HIV vaccine, and Norwegian virologist Dr. Birger Sorensen, who have said there are genetic markers inside COVID-19 proving it is man-made. And there are, certain non-natural amino acids that are used as markers inside DNA strains that are being manufactured, kind of like a bookmark, if you will, and they're present in the COVID-19. Now, China is warning that Biden's recently ordered probe into the Wuhan lab leak theory could be America's Waterloo. And they're comparing the new COVID investigation to the search for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. In other words, it's another big, huge hoax. And China is saying the United States is taking a dangerous stance. And more than that, Chinese officials are coming forward saying that COVID-19 actually started in the United States. And their spokesman for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lujan Zhao, took to Twitter to suggest the origin of COVID-19 was 19. And, said, when did patient zero begin in the U.S.? How many people are infected? And he was saying it might have been the United States Army that brought the epidemic to Wuhan. Because remember, there was a military game taking place over there that the U.S. was involved in near Wuhan. And many of those U.S. soldiers turned out to be ill. So again, we're seeing all these links to various universities in the United States. We know that the U.S. was funding a lot of this research at the Wuhan Institute. And what China may mean by this new investigation. Now remember, Biden canceled the State Department investigation into COVID-19 and then reordered a new one by the intelligence services, who I wouldn't trust to tell me if it was a rainy day or not. And but if it does backfire and it turns out that this did in fact come from the United States, that it was artificial, that China was contracted to do some work on what was potentially a biological weapon, it's really going to be an ugly, ugly situation. Now, Representative Michael McCall of Texas, he's the lead Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is saying that it is more likely than not that COVID-19 originated from a lab accident, and calling all of the earlier reports about bats and wet markets and all the rest of it the worst cover-up in human history. I'm not sure about that. That cover-up they had of the Boston Marathon bombing, that was pretty sloppy. The cover-up of 9/11 was pretty sloppy. The cover-up of TWA 800 was really sloppy. The cover-up of the murder of Vincent Foster, that really takes the record for being sloppy. Another article, this one came on over from loops.hama.blog. And it's drawing a parallel with the recent about face in our corporate media with the portion of George Orwell's 1984, where the orator is giving a lengthy wartime speech at a rally praising the heroic ally of Eurasia and denouncing the arch enemy of East Asia, but is then quietly handed a note partway through and immediately reverses it. Basically saying we've always been at war with Eurasia and East Asia is our friend. And that's exactly what we saw with the corporate media that was saying natural origin, natural origin, natural origin, skid marks, China, 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 China. Now, the World Health Organization has decided to rename the Indian variant COVID Delta because they want all the mutant strains to be rebranded to avoid geographic stigma. And, if that's all the World Health Organization can do about this, we're in real, real trouble. Over in Delhi, the number of COVID cases has just plunged after a mass distribution of ivermectin. It is turning out this is an effective cure for COVID-19, but Big Pharma doesn't want cures. Cures are a bad business model. They want ongoing costly treatments and vaccines to maximize their profits at your expense, both monetarily and in cases of your health as well, side effects and so forth. COVID cases fall below 10,000 for the first time in more than a year, but Fauci is warning America can't declare victory yet. More about this when we come back from these words from our sponsor. And welcome back to our show here, and a friendly reminder that Republic Broadcasting Network needs your continuing support so that we can continue to do what we are doing here, which is keeping the American people fully informed so that they can make good choices. Once again, the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation is 800-724-2719, extension 3. Now, if you send in a donation of $100, you will get your choice of an official RBN coffee mug or an official RBN t-shirt. And so state your preference, include your t-shirt size if necessary, and a return address to send it back to you. And if you donate $115, that's 115, you will get both promotional items. And don't forget the front sight firearms training deal, that's still going on, and that is a real sweet deal for Second Amendment enthusiasts. Okay, so we're talking about COVID-19. We're talking about how Dr. Fauci is saying even though COVID is clearly on the decline in the United States, that, we shouldn't really, declare victory, and we shouldn't give up the lockdowns and the masks, and he's really drunk on his own power, in my opinion. And we're hearing a lot of these issues out there where it's like they want to keep that kind of social control in place. They just don't have a good excuse for it yet. Maybe that's why they ginned up this so-called Indian variant. Now, a while back, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration had issued a statement saying that employees could sue their employers for vaccine injuries if the employers had mandated the vaccines as a condition of employment. Well, then OSHA turned around and reversed that, saying, no, you can't sue. And now they are suspending the requirement for employers to report vaccine-related injuries. They don't want to see those numbers. They don't want you to see those numbers. And if we are, in fact, back in 1976 territory, where the vaccine is actually causing more harm than the virus, the government and big pharma and the corporate media are definitely not going to want you to know that. Because, first of all, people will get angry at the government for having done this. And second, it's going to vindicate all of the people who are out here in independent media saying, be cautious about what you're doing. And corporate media doesn't want that to happen either. They're struggling to maintain their credibility in their audience. The audience is coming over here to independent media, and I'll admit we're cheating, we're using the truth. That makes it really easy for us to compete against corporate media. Now, speaking of censorship, there's this doctor, Dr. Luigi Warren, got kicked out of his Twitter account because he posted a tweet saying people who have taken the jab can shed these spike proteins, which are becoming problematic. Now, here is the interesting part of it. Dr. Warren invented the technology on which the mRNA vaccine is based, but Twitter has decided they know better than the good doctor what you should know and not know about spike proteins. Okay. The CDC, however, has begun an investigation into reports of serious heart inflammation in people between 16 and 45 years of age after receiving the mRNA vaccines from both Pfizer and Moderna. And so they're taking a look at 125 of these cases. And again, I'm not sure I would trust what they're going to conclude, but they're having to take a look because there are so many reports out there about people coming down with these problems. Okay, another story, and this is about keeping that control down there. This is from Politico. And it's basically saying that the COVID lockdown rules on liquor, pot, and telemedicine might and should last past the pandemic. And yeah, you know, we're saying the pandemic says, you know, we need to ease the rules to make life at home more bearable. But there seems to be an agenda to basically keep us in compliance with all of these rules and regulations, even though the pandemic that justified them is clearly on the wane. Okay. Dr. Ahmed Hankir is actually saying it would be dangerous to our mental health to go back to our old way of living too quickly. He said it needs to be phased out slowly. So again, we're hearing all those people who became rich and powerful and influential with masks and lockdowns. They want to hang on to that power. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to get into the international news now. This is a story that started breaking late last week, and it's basically that the U.S. national security system, the intelligence agencies, aided by Denmark, spied on top European politicians, including Angela Merkel. And France has basically come on out through their Secretary of State for European Affairs saying this is extremely serious. And if it is true, and it probably is, it may have consequences. Now, remember, we're not talking about spying on the enemy. We're not talking about espionage in time of war. We're talking about politicians and governments that are supposed to be our friend, and the U.S. was still spying on them, just like they spy on all of us. And so Merkel shouldn't feel like it's personal. The European Union, through the chief Ursula von der Leyen, has warned Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko it is time to change course, and basically offered a bribe of 3 billion euros as a support package to Belarus if Lukashenko leaves power. Now, Lukashenko is Europe's most liberal leader, and I'm wondering why they're after him. But they're trying to bribe him to step down. I guess they couldn't rig the election against him. Meanwhile, the United States is warning Venezuela against welcoming Persian warships in Venezuela. Now, you've got the U.S. is parking warships off the Iranian coast, as a matter of fact. But the U.S. is getting very nervous as a pair of Iranian warships have neared the African coast, sparking speculation that they might wind up in the Western Hemisphere. It's going to be a little rough getting around the Horn. So the two ships, one is a frigate, the other is an old oil tanker converted to a staging base, and they're still off Africa's east coast. And the supposition is they'll eventually loop around Africa and then maybe cross the Atlantic to show up in Venezuela. And the U.S. is out there wagging their finger at the Venezuelans and saying, don't you do that. So, over in Beijing, they are calling for equipping the People's Liberation Army with even more nuclear weapons to deter the United States. For some reason, China has it in their head that the United States represents a threat and has hostile intentions toward them. I don't know where they get that idea, but that seems to be where they're coming from. And the Chinese have a huge stock of DF-41, JL-2, and JL-3 missiles. The DF-41 is China's solid-fueled road mobile ICBM, and the JL-2 and JL-3 are China's intercontinental range submarine-launched ballistic missiles. All three of the missiles can carry nuclear warheads. So everybody's rattling their sabers here. Over in Israel and Palestine, and boy, don't you get sick of hearing about Israel all the time? I certainly do. But they are causing trouble, and we need to pay attention. Story coming out of Palestine Chronicle the Israeli occupation authorities have approved plans for the construction of 560 settlement units in Bethlehem, built on Palestinian land. And the director of the Wall and Settlement Resistance Commission office in Bethlehem, Hassan Brija, said the construction of these new settlement units in Mitzad settlement, built illegally on Palestinian land in the villages of Kisan and Al-Rashada, were approved yesterday. So Israel is still out there stealing Palestinian lands, and if you say, I think that's wrong, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, you know, we're the victim, and God gave us that land, and blah, 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 blah. Now, over at the United Nations, the Human Rights Council voted 24-9 last Thursday to launch an investigation against Israel for alleged war crimes, including during the recent war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and they are calling for an arms embargo against Israel. Now, an additional 14 countries out of the 47-member body abstained. None of the European Union countries supported the measure. So right there, you know who is under Israel's thumb and who is not. And, of course, in that center point in the thumbprint, and this is coming out of Reuters, the United States has said it regrets the UN move to launch the Gaza probe, and saying that it threatens to imperil the progress that has been made toward resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict. Well, I think Israel's recent bombing of Gaza probably did a lot more damage to that. Meanwhile, China is sending emergency humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian government at the earliest possible date. This is coming from the China International Development Cooperation Agency. Spokesperson Tian Lin said that in order to help the Palestinian government and people cope with the emergency humanitarian crisis and demonstrate the international humanitarian spirit, the Chinese government has launched an assistance response mechanism, and good for China on that one. Okay. Interestingly enough, in Washington, D.C., on Memorial Day weekend, 35,000 people attended a rally in support of Palestine, and you probably didn't see any video or pictures of this in the American corporate media, I'll wager. And I saw a photo, and it was a huge demonstration, peaceful. But definitely a lot of people. The tide is turning. And I think pretty much everybody understands Israel lost the public relations war on this last attack on Gaza because Israel comes across as a bully shooting fish in a barrel. Because those Palestinians, they're basically surrounded. They're in an enclave. They're not allowed across the border. They don't have a navy. They don't have an air force. They don't have a standing army. And Israel just goes on in with all these U.S. supplied weapons plus whatever's coming out of their laboratory to basically test it so they can go to other countries and say, see, we've already proved this will kill a lot of people. And, look at all that Palestinian blood out there. Over at WhatsApp, dozens of Palestinian journalists had their accounts blocked during the media coverage of the recent confrontation between Israel and Palestine in the Gaza Strip. And journalists from Al Jazeera and Agence France Presse, based in occupied East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, said they received messages from WhatsApp informing them their accounts were blocked for breaching community standards. So apparently showing what Israel is doing to the Palestinians is a violation of WhatsApp community standards, which is why I will never use WhatsApp. Tahsin al-Astal, the vice president of the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, told Agence France Presse that an estimated 100 journalists in Gaza had their WhatsApp accounts blocked. Okay. Now, Facebook, because of their very blatant bias in the reporting about what's going on in the Middle East. Their approval rating and advertising sales are plummeting, and so they've got a reputation crisis on their hands, and it's going to be very hard for them to deal with that as long as they continue to toady up to Israel's point of view about what is going on, because people are sick and tired of Israel, and they're sick and tired of social media and corporate media that are there carrying Israel's water at every point there. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is still involved in a fight trying to hang on to power, and Netanyahu backers slammed these two right-wing parties that are forming a coalition government. They're denouncing them as traitors, picketed their homes, issued threats that led police to provide additional security for at least two of the targeted politicians. And so, Netanyahu is not going to give up without a fight, and I'm afraid there will be a fight. Over at the Navy, this is a story coming out of military.com. The U.S. Navy has what they call a Super Hornet gap. They don't have enough of those, and so they're getting ready to receive F-16 Fighting Falcon fighter jets from the Air Force. And the idea is that some of their Hornet models are considered legacy models. They're outdated. They don't have the latest bells and whistles. So the Navy is going to shelve roughly 55 aircraft over the next year. Gee, I wonder what they cost. And they want to transition to the FA-18EF Super Hornet, but they don't have enough yet. So they're going to fill in that gap with some Air Force F-16s. Meanwhile, the Air Force itself is getting ready to mothball dozens of A-10s, F-15s, and F-16s in the fiscal year 22 budget. They want to send more than 200 aircraft to the boneyard to free up $1.3 billion in savings that they can reinvest in cutting-edge technologies like the 6th-generation fighter, which they tell us will be a lot more cost-effective and reliable than the F-35, and they want to get into hypersonic weapons in a big way because they're lagging behind Russia and China. Another interesting little story, the Army is seeking a big boost in new weapons for combat arms units in the 2022 budget request. Pardon me. But they're actually cutting the amount of ammunition that it will use to train with amid more than $500 million in cuts to bullets and other things that go bang. So they'll have more guns but less bullets. Speaking of hypersonic, a Chinese physicist has said that a new wind tunnel in Beijing will be put into service soon. It is capable of Mach 30. And this will be just an amazing research platform for hypersonic research and development. It's going to put China between 20 and 30 years ahead of the West. The United States does not have anything approaching Mach 30 in terms of a wind tunnel. Let's get into the economic news here. The pandemic-era housing protections, the eviction moratorium, they expire this month, and millions could face eviction. That is going to be an ugly, ugly situation unless somebody can do something about it. And it's not just the renters and mortgage payers that are in trouble. Landlords are in trouble because the rents haven't been coming in. The banks that issued those mortgages, they're in trouble. The whole thing is this rat's nest of red ink, if you will. If they start throwing people out on the streets in those kind of numbers, I think we're going to definitely see rioting in the streets. Story out of Investment Watch blog. It looks like gold is headed up and may test new highs. So that's good news for those of you who were wise enough to get into precious metals. Meanwhile, Joe Biden was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Actually, he's visiting Tulsa, Oklahoma today to mark the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And he made a point of saying that he is going to take new steps to close the racial wealth gap. And it sounds a lot like we're going to take money from the white people and give it to the black people. In other words, communism, not to mention buying the black vote for the coming elections. Meanwhile, a federal appeals court slammed down provisions of Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID spending package that designated billions of priority financial aid to businesses owned by women and minorities. Pardon me. And the court slapped it down, saying it's still racist, it's wrong, and everybody has to be treated with an even hand. Over in Great Britain, their bank HSBC Holdings has announced they're going to sell most of their retail locations across the United States, reducing 148 branches down to 58 and winding down an additional 35 to 40 branches. They're basically moving out of retail banking to focus on the wealth management needs of its high net worth clients. In other words, it doesn't want to be bothered with you hoi polloi with your little tiny savings accounts. So HSBC will go from 1.4 million customers to about 300,000 in the U.S. and will not be servicing customers with basic checking and savings accounts in balances below 75,000 or any businesses with a turnover of $5 million or less, according to the Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, one area of the economy that's doing very well, gun sales are up 64%. Research is showing that about a fifth of all Americans who bought guns last year were first-time gun owners. Sales usually spike around the elections, but the sheer volume is definitely notable. Now, if we could just find ammunition to go with those guns, and it's still a mystery where all that ammo is going, especially if the military is cutting back on their training needs. And finally, before we hit the commercial break, one business that's doing very well is chip manufacturers. There's a global shortage, and so those chip manufacturers who are in business right now, their revenues are reaching historic highs. And they can't get those things out the door fast enough. So basically, good for them. Getting on to the immigration news here, the Biden administration Friday stated that families arriving at the U.S. border with Mexico would have their court proceedings fast-tracked fewer than 2 weeks after it announced it was lifting pandemic limitations on asylum. So the illegal immigrants are pouring on in, carrying all kinds of diseases with them. All right, we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines, 512-248-8252. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are open, area code 512-248-8252, and we're going to go to Marco in Alabama. Hello, Marco. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Right. Just a couple of observations. Yesterday's situation update from Mike Adams on Memorial Day. He broke down the 5 levels of coercion that the United States government will use to bring us to getting that vaccine, that death shot.
Yeah.
Basically, he spoke of, with the first level, just, the random idiots, the early adopters, the people who are like, oh, there's a vaccine, great, let's take it. And then level 2 is level 2 of the coercion, dude, is basically, to get people to take the vaccine by bribing them with food and lottery tickets.
Yeah, or holding my mother-in-law hostage.
Yep. Level 3 is basically corporate America bringing down the gauntlet, dude, sitting there saying, well, in order for you to fly on an airplane, this is the stage that we're currently in right now, to either to fly or to go to a movie theater or go to a baseball game. And then next coming is 4, where, you know, you're going to be fined. And 5 is basically do guns at the door.
Yeah.
And if you guys want to hear more about that, check out Mike Adams' situation update for Memorial Day. I think it's an eye-opener for sure. My second observation is I'm noticing that, you know, how our society is really starting to fall apart. You know, the NBA playoffs. I know most of you don't care about sports or anything like that, but there's good thing to note from this. One of the Brooklyn Nets players, you know, had gone to the center insignia piece, dude, for the Boston Celtics and stomped on it, and then basically a fan threw a water bottle, dude, at the player as he was going into the tunnel, and now he has a felony for assault with a deadly weapon, dude, a nearly empty water bottle, you guys. This is where our society is going. Other than that, you know, I just look at, you know, the Biden situation getting worse, and I want to know where this rumor of Trump, dude, possibly coming back in August. I mean, that I read this on Yahoo, because you have to look at the enemy's periodicals, dude, so that to see what they're talking about, and get both sides, dude, of the, you know, get things from the wokies and all that, man.
Well, you know, the talk about Trump coming back in August, I mean, they've been saying that pretty much the entire year, and it's based on the idea that some of these audits are finally going to complete and, you know, basically indicate that there was massive election fraud. I'm very concerned about what happened down in Fulton County, Georgia. I think that building was compromised just so that the Democrats could say the ballots being counted weren't the ones that were cast by the voters, and it's just a pathetic attempt to discredit the audit.
I mean, Michael, we already know, dude, that election fraud happened.
Yes, it does.
Remember Ruby Freeman and her daughter in our minds. We all remember what happened at Cobalt Hall in Detroit, dude, where they boarded up the windows and wouldn't let Republicans in.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was the proof right there. That's etched in all of our minds. And you know, the fact of the matter is that regardless if they find out, you know, voter fraud or not, unless we, the people, do something, dude, Joe Biden's still going to be there.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right about that. Marco, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification. We've got callers waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, partly, area code 512-248-8252. And we're going to go to Paul in New Jersey. Hello, Paul. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Concerning the Tulsa race riot, you know, I have to admit, I've always heard it as that in the past, Tulsa race riot. Only recently it seems like they're exacerbating the situation by calling it a massacre.
Yes.
And I really don't see it as a massacre, because generally I consider massacres where the people who are being killed are unarmed. Now, if you read a timeline of what transpired in Tulsa 100 years ago, you'd find that there were hotheads on both sides.
Yes, there generally are. A lot
of blacks gathering down at the courthouse armed, and you had a lot of whites gathering down at the courthouse armed. And I think things escalated. Some accidents happened. Shots went off, and before you know it, there's just gangs from both sides, even doing drive-by shootings. Shooting and strafing at each other, and it went on and on. And I just see it as one of these things where the majority of the people were white. You know, it was a mostly white city. Blacks were the minority. And because of those factors, generally more blacks are going to die because they're outnumbered. And I think what the media is doing is they're trying to, you know, like perpetuate the myth of black victims. And they're again doing it in this instance, and I don't think it's really helpful, you know, for race relations today, for this to perpetuate these things as though it was just a bunch of innocent blacks who just got ganged up by whites and they burned the neighborhood down. I really am. I don't think that's doing a good social service. Now, remember too, when the initial riots happened. And the reports came out, the initial investigation came out, the death toll was way lower.
Yes.
And they claimed it was, I think, about somewhere around 15 whites and about 36 blacks. And over time now, they've been, it seems like, ginning up the numbers, and now they're claiming it's as many as 300. Now, we might want to put one last thing into perspective concerning that, is that according to Statistica, in 2019, approximately 7,000 blacks were killed by other blacks in 2019. And nobody makes a stink about that when it's 7,000 blacks killed by other blacks. Nobody makes, there's no reparations for that. There's no clarion call. It's this morbid, always focusing on what the other race is doing to you.
Yes.
And I really think it's spreading a mental illness more than the black community today, because it seems that they're mostly the aggressors of one, if one objectively goes through the statistics, crime statistics, and murder statistics. And so I urge you, Michael, to please, if you can, and you are able to keep your, and you likely are, keep your intellectual wits about you, and call it the Tulsa race riot. And a good comparison to compare that with, the Tulsa race riot, it can't compare to the 1863 New York draft riots.
Those were definitely ugly.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, thank you, Michael.
All right, well, thank you. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, when this eviction moratorium ends and we start seeing millions of Americans thrown into the streets, I think we're going to see rioting follow that as well. So maybe they'll call them the eviction riots or something. Anyway, we're going to go to Kelly in Austin. Hello, Kelly. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
There are a couple of things. One about Biden. Can you hear me well? I've got a new headpiece on here.
No, I hear you just fine.
Okay, very good. If Biden is removed from office because it's finally demonstrated that this election was stolen, everything he has done since January 20th is null and void immediately.
Correct.
Think of the chaos that's going to cause.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, I am too. In fact, I hope they end up like lemmings running over a cliff. Anyway, the real reason I'm calling here, main reason I'm calling is that yesterday a caller from Memphis asked about the Memphis Bridge. He wondered, is Kelly an engineer? And he thought maybe I'm a geophysicist. Well, I'm an engineer. My undergrad degree is in geological engineering.
Okay.
My professional certification is in geology. I'm a PG, and my doctorate is in geochemistry. But I've dealt with these things over time. Seismicity. In fact, I worked in structural geology for many years, and that would cross over into matters related to seismicity and whatever. And my response to the question, it was a good question, is that the damage to the bridge is probably not related to seismicity. It's probably related to bad engineering and
poor maintenance.
And poor maintenance, that's right. And I can point you to cases across the country regarding bridges and dams in which that's the case. If that were related to seismicity, related to anything along the New Madrid fault zone up there, you see a lot more widespread structural damage, not just on bridges, but on buildings and
just one crack on one bridge.
Yeah. That's probably more related again to when bad engineering or substandard, let's say substandard engineering, and into bad inspection.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the big stink here, is that apparently the crack's been there for a while, and whoever was supposed to be inspecting the bridge just missed it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I travel back and forth between Louisiana and Texas a lot. There's a bridge in Lafayette, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, on I-10, which has been enough, for some 50 some odd years. And it's in very bad shape. It has failed one inspection after another, and cars are still traveling that bridge over the Calcasieu River.
Yeah, well, you know, we're dealing with infrastructure issues here in Indiana. There was a report that came out the other day about just how many dams are considered unstable. It's a little nerve-wracking because Claire and I, where we live, we're in between 3 lakes, all of which are artificial.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, dams are a serious problem in this country.
Yes.
They were constructed many years ago. They've not been well maintained or inspected, and many of them are in serious danger, I think, of failure for many reasons. And of course, that means that people who live downstream of the dams are in peril if that water comes rushing through and floods them all out. So it's not just the Memphis Bridge, which I think is a problem related again to I think substandard engineering. Let's go back to New Orleans, for example, in 2005 when Katrina blew through there,
yes,
and all the flooding there. Upon further inspection of the levees and the sheet dikes there and sheet pilings around there, the city, the people who conducted the survey realized that these things were not engineered well in the first place.
Yeah.
And so what happens now is when you go back and you look at these things from the perspective of many years, you realize that the engineering was not good engineering in the first place. It was rushed through. They did things to get it to get it built, and the assumption was that, well, if there's a failure, it certainly won't happen in our lifetime, and we will never be held accountable for that.
There's a little too much of that attitude pervading our entire government, to be very, very honest. And it's like, a while back when somebody built something like a building or a dam, it was built to last, and now everything has a lifespan. And as you say, their attitude is it only has to last until I'm out of office.
Well, that's exactly right. So let's say some engineer puts his stamp and signature on a design when he's 35 years old, and this thing fails, 35, 40, 50 years down the line. There's a good chance he's going to be dead by then.
Yes.
I put my stamp and my signature on many things related to geological engineering aspects of the projects. But I never do that if I think that I'm being asked to do something that I'm going to compromise my professional standards on. Unfortunately, there are too many engineering companies in this country, and I've worked for a couple of them. There are too many engineering companies in this country that are willing to do that.
Yes.
Because they realize that the liability 30, 40, 50 years down the road is nothing that they're going to have to deal with. And with regard to this bridge in Memphis, again, I'm curious how many other projects the engineers who put their stamp and their seal on that design were involved in other things that might not actually have been should not have been stamped and signed. I know I'm taking it. It might sound like a gratuitous swipe at engineers. I work with engineers all the time. 99% of them, 99.9%, 99.9% professionals.
Yes.
But there's that small...
Well, my father was an engineer. Initially, he got his engineering degree from MIT. And I remember, as a kid, he just dreamed of the opportunity of designing and building a bridge. So he was really gung-ho about wanting to do a good job about that. The other aspect, to be fair to the engineers, are when blueprints are signed off and approved, sometimes the construction companies will take shortcuts. I remember there was this disaster of this overhead walkway at an airport that collapsed, and they discovered the reason for it was that the company that built the walkway didn't follow the as-builts exactly, and they took a shortcut to make it easier and cheaper for them to get the job done, and that's what led to the failure.
I know that case, and there have been many times in my career when I've been asked by clients or attorneys, well, can you just look the other way and sign this? And my response is, hell no.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming a liability because I'm the professional geologist. I put my PG stamp on it. You want me to look the other way because down the road I'm going to get sued and you're not? Hell no. Hell no. I have a daughter who's a PhD in engineering.
Yes.
There's no way in hell she'd do that. I mean, it's crazy. So, I mean, getting back to the Memphis Bridge issue, you know, it's enticing to think that perhaps seismicity might account for the instability in the bridge right now. I really doubt that. I mean, really, going back to Occam's razor, it's really more a function of design and poor maintenance, I think, than anything else.
I would say the poor maintenance, because if subsidence was the reason for the excessive stress on that one load-bearing member, you would expect to see similar cracks forming, you know, in other load-bearing members, and it just we just haven't seen that yet.
Well, that's right. Now, go further down in Mississippi into, say, Baton Rouge, where you have the big Mississippi River Bridge.
Yes.
Fort Allen into Baton Rouge. That thing is 50 years old.
Yes.
And it's a healthy bridge. Now, you have other bridges as well. So you really have to consider that there are other factors that account for it. It may be comforting to think that, well, there are other factors that are cause for that, such as seismicity or subsidence. Well, I guarantee you, if there's subsidence in Memphis, there's a hell of a lot more subsidence around Baton Rouge.
Yes, there would be.
And there's around Memphis. And that bridge, which was designed, to last for ages. And then there's the Huey P. Long Bridge.
Yes.
Over in New Orleans.
Yes.
That thing is intact, and it really hasn't shown.
Yeah, I remember when I was working on the Mississippi Queen, we used to sail under that thing all the time.
Yeah. I mean, so modern engineering is really we need to praise modern engineers.
Yes,
they do marvelous work. But again, don't look for extraneous factors such as earthquakes, unless if it were related to earthquakes, you'd see it soon after the tremor. Period. Yeah, really. Okay, Mark, that's all I got to tell you.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Al in Canada. Hello, Al. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Wow, another great call.
Yes.
I just sent you an email of one of these old suspension bridges in the United States that I had crossed over a lot on down in Poughkeepsie in New York.
Yeah.
And it's one of those beautiful, metal suspension bridges. I hope I did it right. I gave you like a shot of it, what it looks like before you're supposed to get on it, on Google Maps. And your last caller, what he was talking about with these engineering firms, there's so much truth in what he said, because Maple Leaf, who is owned by Michael McCain, they had a big plant built up here in Ontario, and the engineering firm that designed it were just really stupid. They absolutely forgot that it's a meat plant, and all of the refrigeration is going on the roof. So the whole roof was the roof structure was undersized.
Yes.
And they had to bring in on nights a welding firm to actually go up up in there in the roof and actually start welding all these reinforcing rods and that.
Mm-hmm.
So they got sued. They went out of business. That engineering firm went out of business. They got sued by McCain. But even after only the first phase of that plant was finished, that plant was $1 billion with a B dollars over budget.
Mm-hmm.
And McCain actually went to the federal government for a loan, not a bank, a federal government. And what do you think the chances that loan ever got paid back?
Probably zero.
Oh, yes, definitely zero. That's why he went to the federal government, right? Basically just to get a big tax write-off, like up front. Anyway, the reason why I really did call was because of something I read. When you brought up ivermectin with what's going on in India, it reminded me of something I read from McGill University.
Mm-hmm.
They studied the effects of vitamin D.
Yes.
And they said it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything, right? Basically, you just get expensive urine. And I sent you an email on that. Another email I sent you that had to do with McGill was where it gets its funding from. Guess what's right there?
Yeah, I'm looking at the mails that you sent me here.
Right?
Yeah, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Global Affairs, Grand Challenges Canada. It's all about the Benjamins.
You got that right, Mike. You absolutely have that right. And obviously, I was reading as soon as you brought up that India and ivermectin, as well as you mentioned. This has been mentioned for over a year now. Was that hydroxychloroquine?
Yes.
There's another one. I actually read up an article about this with what's going on in India. Yeah, and they're it just basically put the brakes on this rapid transmission of this virus, or the effects weren't as deep, which would lead people to believe that this ivermectin is a therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It doesn't tinker with your DNA or your RNA or anything like that. So, if vitamin D did absolutely nothing, then why do people are more prone to get sick in the winter, in the fall?
Well, I think what they were trying to say is that vitamin D had no effect on COVID-19, but everybody understands vitamin D is good for you, and it's an essential nutrient that you have to have, that you should spend time outdoors to make the vitamin D naturally, as opposed to pills which don't absorb very well.
Well, pills don't absorb very well because usually people will take them on an empty stomach, right? So
Gotcha.
You end up with literally very expensive urine.
All right, well, Al, listen, I'm sorry to do this. I got to cut you off. We got to take a break for commercials. We've got callers waiting on the line. We have open lines, 512-248-8252, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones to James in Charlotte. James, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hello, Mike. I've been doing some reading, try to do some in-depth reading, and I'd like to sort of fill in some gaps and trace back the origins of COVID-19 and maybe add a name to the discussion that I don't think people have heard of yet. From what I found, the origin of COVID goes back quite a number of years, at least 10.
Mm-hmm.
About this time, Dr. Fauci was apparently already in the process of looking for a viral bioweapon and was monitoring work that was going on in various labs throughout the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And what he saw that looked the most promising was the work of Dr. Ralph Baric,
Okay.
B-A-R-I-C, who is a microbiologist and chemistry professor at the rather ominous-sounding Gilling School of Global Public Health
Okay.
at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This was around the year 2015. About this time, Dr. Baric had already undertaken an unauthorized gain-of-function study for the synthesis of a supercharged SARS-type coronavirus.
Okay.
And this type of work was strictly forbidden by both the Center for Disease Control and the WHO, World Health Organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so about this time, Fauci was cooperating, was working with Dr. Baric and directing funds to his work at Chapel Hill. But there were some oversight people at CDC that found out about it and determined that this was illegal work, and they were in the process of about to shut the research down. So soon afterward, Fauci made arrangements with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to move the ongoing research to a Canadian government lab in Winnipeg, Manitoba, that would be out of reach of CDC or any other U.S. agencies. And it was moved to Winnipeg in November of 2015, but apparently things did not work out there either. The director of the lab refused to cooperate and wouldn't let Fauci have access to this secure lab.
Okay.
This was likely at the direction of Canada's main oversight agency, the what's called the National Microbiology Research Council.
Okay.
And so soon after being denied access to the lab in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Fauci moved it again. Had this viral bioweapon flown to Wuhan, and this was in January of 2016. He had to bribe the Chinese with $3.7 million to do it, which he had plenty of access to plenty of money from his department's $6 billion in annual budget. So that's how it arrived in Wuhan.
Okay.
And I'm understanding that Fauci traveled back and forth from Washington to Wuhan a bit over the next 3.5 years to further oversee the work that was being done to develop that bioweapon there. So that, I think, would maybe fill in some of the gaps that have to trace the actual movement of this coronavirus as an actual bioweapon. I think there's no doubt that that's what it was.
Well, I think it was a work in progress because as a biological weapon, it's not turned out to be very effective. But I wonder if this hard push to get everybody vaccinated is out of concern as to what it might mutate into.
That's certainly a possibility. But at any rate, they wanted to try and keep it as much of a secret as possible.
I can understand why. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, Trudeau paid Wuhan almost $1 million to keep quiet about his limited involvement in it.
Well, there was a story that came out a couple of weeks ago where the Wuhan facility was caught destroying computer records from those times. Anyway, listen, James, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Got callers waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones to Peter in Los Angeles. Peter, long time no hear from. What's on your mind today?
Well, Mike, I first want to say that I listened to Paul and I listened to Kelly. Both had good calls. And
yes.
I cannot give an engineering. I'm not such a great observer of engineering, but I'm an excellent observer of government malfeasance.
Yes.
And when you talk
Me too.
About
join the club.
Yeah, and you wonder even back in some of the projects, Mike, with under the TVA and the CCC under Roosevelt, which was just a big. It was also pork. One of the reasons why everybody's been after and thumping for years for infrastructure, massive, investment in infrastructure, and we haven't gotten, even though clearly we need it, is that the party out of power never wants to surrender the ability for the party in power to award their pork barrel, contracts, construction contracts to all their friends. So we go, years and years without getting an infrastructure, investment or significant movement on that. But you wonder, even back in the TVA and the CCC and all the 30 stuff under Roosevelt, how many of them were shoddily made or done with pork, But what we do know for sure whether the engineering was good or bad, and Kelly's better than at me, is that we know that the Deepwater Horizon was inspected, right, that same month, that it blew up and given an award, right, by the government overseers. And that mine that collapsed in West Virginia was given the go-ahead by the governmental oversight thing on mine safety. And it turns out they were getting just like the hookers and cash and all that sort of thing to the inspectors, just like the SEC inspectors with Bernie Madoff and going down. So one of the lesson here is that even if the engineering is good, the government oversight, inspection, and maintenance is terrible.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And you're right. I mean, we go back in and we look at these things afterwards and say that they never should have passed inspection, and yet they did. Same thing with that bridge in Memphis. Supposedly, it had been inspected several times over the last few years, and they just missed that crack.
And remember the dam up near Sacramento?
Yes.
They had the emergency patch up or would have wiped out Sacramento. These went on for years and years, and they knew about it ahead of time, just like they knew about the drinking water in Dearborn or wherever that was.
Flint.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing was about Paul's call and his call about how they referred to the Tulsa riots as massacre, and I think he made a really good point on that. And I sent you something this morning. We all know that the media is trying to, the you-know-who-owned media has been trying to divide and conquer and not report on black crime or the fact that, like you were saying, it's all this stuff is going to come from a redistribution of wealth from white people to black people or white people to anybody else, not white people. But I was saying that we never get the right answer or it's buried or it's spun. But I sent you something this morning that I got out of UNS about something, and I'm a big-time historian about World War II, and about an incident in Queensland, Australia, where a black unit, and they were all support units, they were not combat units, revolted and turned on its officers, and in this ensuing melee, they expended over 700 rounds. Now, that's a major thing.
Yes, it is.
You're talking about 700. And I know you know what an M1 Garand was.
Yes.
And that was an 8-round clip. So that's like 100 guys reloading. Or one guy reloading 100 times. But they didn't even have Garands. They had the old 03 Springfield, which was 5 rounds, bolt action. How long does it take a bolt action, to go through 700 rounds and reload with 5 rounds? And yet, nobody ever heard of this. This is a major deal. People died. And what you do hear about is the great Tuskegee Airmen who won the war single-handed and have a made-up ace that they had to go back 70 years afterwards and give him ace status because after 2.5 years of combat, they didn't have any aces. But what we don't hear is this, right? Insurrections, rebellions. They weren't even in combat. It wasn't like fragging an officer in combat. This is turning on people in peacetime in Australia and expending 700 rounds. That's pretty bad, Mike. Really.
That's very intense.
Another thing, I sent it to you. You might want to take a look at it. But nobody hears that. You just hear about what war winners they were and how great we were. They fought discrimination, and they fought the Germans and all that stuff. But you can almost guarantee that there were a lot of hotheads in Tulsa that were black, just like there's a lot of hotheads everywhere that are black that dominate the crime and the murder and the rapes and the armed robberies and all the weapons charges. So whatever. But here we have again, and now maybe they'll revolt less now. Now that all the whites are being purged from the armed forces, or they're trying to purge them all. But nobody's trying to purge these people that did insurrections, right?
Yeah.
Have a history of it. I'm unaware of any white unit that ever did that, or any other unit, period. So, anyways, there you go. That's my comment for the day, Mike. And that's,
all right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Mark, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, what's going on? Hope you had a
tell
good
me.
holiday. Listen, funny what's going on here. The masks are coming off very quickly. I was at the gym today. You know, nobody was wearing a mask. Literally nobody.
Yes.
Last week when it started, you know, it's like half the people were, half the people, including employees, not wearing them today. They said it came from corporate that they take them up. Now, I also noticed all the stores around here more and more unmasking, even the employees.
Yes, I'm seeing that here.
Now, this is what I think is going on right now. This all started when I knew Fauci was dirty from the get-go.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us did. But when it became more and more clear that Fauci is dirty, even to the corporate media, I think they're starting to panic now. I think they're afraid, for instance, that the Chinese are going to start to tell the truth. That actually, yeah, they had that lab there, and they were keeping those germs there, but it all came from North Carolina or Maryland or wherever else these things are being made.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's going on. Now they're starting to panic. I don't trust them still. It's possible they may try to spring a real heavy-duty bioweapon, but I think at this point they're afraid they're going to be caught even trying to do that. So that way, it's good news. But, again, we got to stay on our toes because you don't know what these clowns might be up to. You know they've been rigging all along. They've been rigging the entire virus as far as the cycles go.
Yes.
You have everything around 28 cycles now, so you're not going to have much coming out. They can always rev it up to 40 again and start a panic again. That's why I say people got to be on their toes and understand where these evil scumbags are coming from, because there's no telling what they still might try to do. I know that, you know, the decrepit imposter there in the White House, he said that, oh, you need a mask or, or take the vaccine. But the impression I got is most of the people wearing the mask probably took the vaccine also.
Yeah, I think so.
Probably never took the vaccine. And I think they realize this. I think the establishment realizes this. And it was mostly a face-saving thing that the imposter came up with. Can't really say for sure, but it really seems like that. It's not like you have a lot of signs in stores saying if you didn't get the vaccine, put on a mask. The only one I've seen that is Trader Joe's, and yeah, of course they're not asking you at the door; they just have to sign up there.
Yeah.
The CDC, the Center for Disease Spreading, said so. I think it's a good sign. I think they're getting scared. I think they're realizing the American people are getting more and more wise to them. It's not happening like that in Canada. Getting more and more like a police state. The same thing with Australia. And a lot of the other British. If you notice, the British Commonwealth countries are, for the most part, the worst. And I believe that's because instead of taking an oath to the Constitution and the people of their countries, they take an oath to this degenerate, pedophile, miserable excuse of the so-called royal family. And that's one of the problems. The royal family is some of the worst globalists imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what you're seeing with the why you're seeing so many of these Commonwealth countries really, turning into total dictatorship. But the United States, we are different. We do have our Constitution. Thank God for that.
Well, I don't know. Our government really isn't paying much attention to that anymore. And, from where I sit, we're definitely descending into fascism.
We are, but not as quick. And we can stop it still. Because, again, we have states' rights, too. You have states like Florida, Texas, South Dakota, and others that finally stood up, told the decrepit imposter where to go. And they can't really enforce it. So, I mean, you do have things like that. You don't have that in these Commonwealth countries. All right? So there is, and we also, of course, have the Second Amendment, which is one of the most important. Of all the amendments, that's probably the most important one because...
Well, that's the amendment that gives teeth to the other 9 in the Bill of Rights.
To the whole Constitution, it gives teeth.
Yeah.
And that is very important. And again, these Commonwealth countries, the ones that did allow guns for a while, they just caved in and gave them up, shamefully. And that's the problem. What they should do is get rid of that disgusting, degenerate world family and become regular republics.
Okay.
Have a constitution like ours. That would help them. A lot of other Europe, part of Europe is really, bearing down, but other parts are starting to loosen up too and starting to realize it's not working. And people are starting to rebel.
Yeah, which is why I think they're going to start wagging that Indian variant at us, the COVID Delta. They've renamed it.
And we got to be careful.
Yep.
I don't think there's an Indian variant. I think it's a bunch of BS. But we got to be careful that they don't roll up that, what do you call it again? Those cycles. And
on the PCR test.
And make it clear. If you're worried about variants or you're worried about other things, instead of taking a shot in the arm that's not going to do you any good and may actually hurt you, increase the amount of vitamins you take. Get your sunshine.
Yes.
Eat your fruits and vegetables. Eat your organic foods. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right? That's the best vaccine. It's God's and nature's vaccine. I believe, my own version of religion is I believe nature is an agent of God. Okay?
Okay, well, I could see, I can go along with that idea.
I'm much closer to the belief of the American Indians.
Yes.
Than I am with the, what do you call it again, with the Abrahamic religions,
Yes.
And like the Great Spirit and all that, I really believe something like that. I believe God is a spirit, and He is, and like I said, He uses nature as His agent on this earth and maybe on other planets too. Hard to say. So, that's it for now, Mike. I'm trying to. I'm mostly getting it now on repeats because I can't get you on that. I've tried everything.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be talking to Rumble about setting up a live streaming account with them. The only issue is them allowing me to pay for it using PayPal rather than a credit card, which I know is a minor sticking point, but it would just, my comfort level. And so I'm working on that this week because I know my YouTube ban has been lifted, but I'm not going back to them.
Yeah, I also see you on VK. I see you on, but you're not streaming from there. I see you. I noticed you're on Minds, and I wish you would try something with with Mike Adams on his on Brighteon.
Well, Brighteon has decided they're not going to go with live streaming. They're concerned about people live streaming something that could be used to justify shutting them down.
Well, he's live streaming Pete Santilli, and Santilli, let me tell you something, I like Santilli, but Santilli really, really gets to the line. I mean, of the crowded theater line. You know what I mean?
All right, I'll get back to Brighteon, but it was in their fact that they've canceled plans to go to live streaming, but I'll go back and say, can I have the same deal that Pete Santilli has?
Yeah, again, and it's great. His screening is coming in great. So, I get it whenever I can, whether I get it on, if I'm driving or when I'm home. He's got 2 great shows, one in the evening and one in the starting at 6 o'clock in the evening, and the other starting 9 o'clock in the morning. And when I can, I try to catch it.
Okay.
Great show, and like I said, it's coming in beautifully. So I don't think Mike Adams is afraid. I think Mike Adams is he's a fighter. Mike Adams is a fighter. He doesn't take any crap from these globalists,
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, Mike. So you take it easy, all right?
All right, I will, and we're coming up on our last commercial break, and rather than start a phone call that I'm going to have to cut off real quick. Little story, up at the International Space Station, the robotic arm, the Canadarm2, has been hit by orbital debris. It's still working, but it kind of underscores the reality. There's a lot of space junk up there that is too small to be tracked, and it can cause a lot of damage to the space station or to other satellites. And obviously, if we go to war in orbit, the situation will be worse. Okay, going to take a break for commercials. Back with phone calls after these few words. And welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today, and we're going to go to Bruce in Texas. Bruce, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind today? Bruce, are you there?
Okay. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you're on the air.
Great. Yeah, I waited for the beat. I want to see if either the fellow from Austin, he seems pretty knowledgeable, or someone else can call in and ring in on this topic here. Now, you mentioned at the start of the show that what the alternative media has that makes it so strong is we deal with the truth. We don't deal with fiction.
Yes.
Okay?
We deal with facts.
Totally. We deal with facts, yes. And so how do you ruin that? Or how do you discredit that? You throw in disinformation. You make us look kooky.
And fake Apollo moon landings, and the current one is all the UFO, flying saucers, space alien stuff. My mailbox is just filled with that crap.
Yeah. Remember John McCain and Hillary Clinton had ankle bracelet monitors, the 2000 indictments.
Yeah.
And all that came out through people in our community. I mean, maybe they weren't creators of that, and maybe they weren't being
maybe they got suckered, and let's not eliminate the possibility that a lot of people posing as independent media are in fact working for the deep state, specifically to come on in and taint the independent media environment.
Right. Okay. Now, I don't want to be mean here, but sometimes it comes out that way. I'm not a very cordial person sometimes.
Okay.
I like to get down to brass tacks, okay? But you had a host on this network yesterday that had a relative newcomer on the scene who's exploded, and it has videos, and he's all over the place, and he's usually pretty good, and I like listening to him, okay? And y'all can go rewind and go find out who it is. I don't think, unless you want me to, I'm not going to name him.
No, don't name him.
They played a video of a girl that got a COVID shot, and the magnet stuck to the COVID shot site. And,
I've already tried that one, and no, the magnets did not stick to where Claire and I got our injections. It's like the one where they say the COVID shots are activating Bluetooth. Again, it's just more of this kookification.
Yes, exactly it is. And anyway, microchips, is it okay with evidence of a microchip being planted? Well, microchips are mostly silicon, for one.
Yes.
And how do you put that in a normal? Are the vials of the virus? I mean, we know there's nanomagnetic tech inside these new gene therapies to target cells or to enable the targeting of cells and the penetration with DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now we talked about that last week. But how do you put a microchip in through a regular syringe with a 22-gauge needle and draw it out of a vial, like, what's it floating around there, like Goldschlager, and try taking a sliver of metal and duct tape it to the wall and put a magnet on it? It's not going to stick, okay? It's not going to stick. So unless this can be explained rationally and someone can duplicate it or explain how it happens in a scientific way that's repeatable or at least logical. I'm very angry sometimes when I hear this stuff being spread around because it makes us all look stupid.
Well, that's what they're trying to do, and whether it's chemtrails or space aliens, like I said, the perennial the Apollo moon landings were fake. They can't use that one anymore because the landing sites have now been imaged by other nations' satellites, some of whom are not friendly to us. And
they still stick with it, though. They say those are fake. They say the photographs are fake.
Well, again, that's their job. It's it's either that or work at the local fast food restaurant for minimum wage.
All right. Thanks a lot.
right, thanks an awful lot. And there is the music. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please spread the word of Republic Broadcasting. Spread the word of whatreallyhappened.com. Please donate. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, and Aloha America.